Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Catherine Krill. We are back for another live stream event with Neolth for Ask the Experts. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Claire Wheeler, and we're excited to be talking to you today about navigating relationship stress, which is the topic that you all voted for in our community poll on the app. So relationships can be really tricky. There are a lot of different types of relationships, like relationships with parents, which can sometimes be tested over the holidays, as we just went through, relationships with significant others, whether you're in high school, college, or beyond that, and even just relationships with friends and peers. So I asked Dr. Wheeler to join us today to just be able to talk through a couple types of those relationship stressors that I just mentioned, what might be the source of stresses for different people and how we can navigate those stresses. So thanks so much, Dr. Wheeler, for joining us, and would love to invite you to come off mute and share a little bit about how do we navigate relationship stress. And just give Dr. Wheeler a
Thank
second
you,
to come off
Catherine.
mute. There we go.
I
Thank
actually
you.
really did push the button and it didn't unmute. So now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction. And I'm happy to be here again for another podcast. Relationships are indeed really important parts of our lives. And for young adults, particularly important. And some of that is because at that stage of life, people are still figuring out who they are. And a lot of times the way we define ourselves is through our relationships with other people. So especially in young adulthood, there's more to a relationship than just the basic give and take that might happen in younger friendships and then friendships later in life, because you are sort of co-creating your adult self with your peers and your friends. And you're also surrounded by people who are potential role models, and that could be your parents, maybe not, or it could be other adults in your life. And those relationships are different. And so this is a topic that I think deserves a lot of conversation within relationships and then about them. So happy to be here and doing that.
Thanks so much, Claire. And yeah, I think you're right. It's a really big topic because it is how we navigate the world, especially in the past 2 years with COVID and a lot of us feeling isolated and maybe being separated from friends if your school was remote, or being separated from family if you were in college and you were living across the country. I mean, it makes it really hard to try to figure out, who you are as a person in those relationships and who you are individually. So just maybe we can start with something that's probably on a lot of people's minds because the holidays just passed, is navigating parental pressure and stress and those types of relationships, which we hear a lot from students can get tricky. I know that you have kids who have gone through school and you've kind of been through it all. What are some of the kind of obstacles or tricky bits that come up in as far as parents and students and that relationship there, and how do you think that students can navigate those relationships with their parents?
Yeah, it's interesting because you have your parents and then you also have all these other adults, your professors and instructors and other people that you interact with at school. And everyone has expectations for you, and everyone probably is telling you about your potential, or many people are probably talking about that. And it may seem, in fact, it may actually be the case that all these adults have an idea about how you should be living your life or what you should be doing next. And I think the first step maybe in starting to navigate that for a young person is to try, when you're thinking about this on your own, try to take some of the emotion out of it and just kind of think of that as a set of facts or a set of maybe issues that you just want to think more clearly about. Your parents often show their love by explaining their expectations and having ideals and dreams for you. But if they aren't your dreams, then that can be problematic, and then that can create a lot of emotional turmoil. And whenever there's emotional turmoil, it's really hard to think clearly. So I think the first step is for each of us individually to step back and sort of think about a relationship, think about our feelings about what is going on between me and the other person, and then try to separate that a little from the feelings so I can just sort of get a look at the situation with more clarity. That would be step one for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So it feels like, sometimes we're in the thick of it in a conversation, whether it's text or in person, and just like those emotions kind of get heated, and you might say something that you didn't mean or didn't want to say, and it can lead to a fight. So it sounds like just taking a step back and just saying, okay, I want to try to look at this objectively, and maybe it's putting the phone down and finishing the conversation tomorrow, or maybe it's doing like a quick breathing exercise. There's one that I really like. It's called Stop, Notice, Respond. I think there are a couple different terms: stop, breathe, respond, different ways people have said it. But you like stop. Okay, take that pause. You can count if you want: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can do a couple deep breaths, like while you're counting, to ground yourself. I think that can really help. And then just notice how you're feeling. Like, okay, I'm texting with one of my parents, and I'm starting to feel upset because they're talking about whatever it is. They want me to pursue this major and I don't want to. So just kind of notice that, like what's going on in the situation, and then kind of think about it. And maybe it's not right then, maybe it's 5 minutes later, maybe it's the next day, and really be thoughtful around, how do I want to respond? So sometimes just taking that space, like a step away, do some deep breathing and being objective, it can really help us frame how we want to respond. So I think that's some great advice that Dr. Wheeler gave everyone, is just to kind of take a step back when that's getting tricky. I'm curious if there are similarities or differences between, that parental stress and then that relationship stress with significant others. I feel like that's a huge thing, um, all the time, but especially growing up, like thinking about high school, maybe you're having your first partner, or college and your first serious relationships, and that can be really exciting, but there can be a lot of ups and downs and a lot of stress there. What are some of the kind of challenges that you think young people are having as far as some of that relationship stress with significant others, and how they can maybe manage that stress?
Indeed, these are really super important relationships early in life. And again, they are part of helping, you decide and form who you are. But they're also fraught, and particularly in this century and in this generation, with social media and normalizing behaviors that aren't necessarily healthy. Sharing images with each other, and other things that get more explicit. And then, of course, the saturation of people's lives with pornography, easily accessible porn. All of those things sort of make this whole issue a lot more complicated nowadays than they were 10, 20 years ago for young people. And so I think, again, it has a lot to do with somehow maintaining a sense of self, even when making these intense connections with other people. And I think, and I think gender may play a role here, but just talking in more general terms, I think it's really important to pay attention to how you feel. And if you, especially if you're a person who has a tendency to focus too much on the other person or change things for the sake of other people, I think it's helpful to sort of check in with yourself on a regular basis. Like, how do I feel when I'm with this person? How do I feel in my body? Do a gut check. How do I feel when I'm making plans to be with my partner? What are the actual feelings here in addition to the story? And again, it's kind of the same thing I said before, but the way you feel about something is really important, even if the people around you are telling you it's either okay or not okay. Young people are now entering a stage of their lives, entering adulthood, where they need to learn to trust their inner compass. And I think that a interpersonal, intimate relationship is an excellent context for exploring that. For how well developed is your ability to know what is good for you and not good for you. And also, I would say, you can take a sort of, it doesn't have to be so heavy and deep, but thinking of it as an experiment. I'm going to try this. It doesn't always have to be forever, never ending love. We're also saturated with those ideas and those images that if you fall in love, it's forever, or, your first love is the most important one. That's really not true for most people. But what is really true and what's important is how you feel, how a person feels when they're in connection and interacting with that intimate partner. And when it doesn't feel good anymore, that's the time to start thinking about whether or not this is actually a relationship you want to stay in.
They're such great points. I always feel like you're giving me advice. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm hearing a lot around expectations and boundaries. And I think especially with the media, and whether it's, Hollywood or even social media, there's a lot of people, posting, maybe especially around Valentine's Day is coming up, like their relationships and what's going on there. And there can be a lot of pressure and expectations. And, if you're feeling like you're getting to a certain age, it needs to be serious, or you need to be really committed. And I think that kind of getting caught up in those expectations can add a lot of pressure. But I like what you said. Again, it's around taking a step back and trying to look at the situation and just understanding, when you're young, I think relationships are about learning what's working for you and learning what's not working for you. And in order to find what's working for you, you sometimes need to go through a couple of relationships where you figured out, okay, that wasn't the best, that didn't work out well. So there need to be kind of a couple of relationships where they start and they're stopping. And that's really kind of the normal and natural part of life. But I mean, it can be heartbreaking and devastating. So to have that good support system there. I think the other thing you said, to help make sure you have that support system there is those boundaries, to make sure that you don't get too involved in the relationship where you're changing yourself or it's all about the other person, but you're still able to maintain that sense of self. And I think that can get really hard in those first relationships where, it's so exciting and you want to spend all the time you can with that other person, which totally makes sense. But maybe making sure that, and for me, it's even like putting things on the calendar, blocking off time, I'm going to do something for myself and have some alone time this day. I'm going to do something with my family. I'm going to do something with my friends without that person. So I'm still, setting those boundaries, maintaining my sense of self. And, if there is a breakup, which sometimes happens, that you still feel like you have that support system to fall back on. So, oh my gosh, we've covered so much and it's only been 10 minutes. So some tricks around, talking to parents in difficult conversations, talking, through breakups and boundaries. And the last thing I would wanted to ask about was friends. I remember this was a real stressor for me growing up. And I think part of it is being in school and having so many other people your own age. Like as you get older, you're not in those environments with so many other people, but peer groups kind of naturally form. And I think it's really easy to feel lonely or to feel like you're excluded or not invited to different events, even though there are so many other people around and you're interacting with so many people. So there's something naturally about kind of being in school and being in that setting where people start to feel like lonely and they're not included. And I'm just curious, you know, how would you, if you're struggling with that, maybe start to navigate some of those relationships with friends? How do you maybe build up good communication skills for if you feel like, I wasn't invited to this event and I'm upset about that? How do you even bring something like that up with a friend?
Such important support is provided to all of us from our friends, and it's so important to be able to maintain them. And now that maybe we can spend time in person over this next year with our friends, these issues, maybe we can start to get some of that back. But this social exclusion, and as you and I know, because we know a lot of neuroscience, we know that actually hits the same pain points in the brain as physical pain. It is a real loss to our spiritually and psychologically and emotionally when we feel friendships fading or feeling excluded. And it is, so there are a couple of things that come to my mind about that. One is, if you're in a school situation or a new situation, I think some of the best friendships really begin around things that are shared activities or shared hobbies or other things or interests. And sometimes that means joining a nerdy club or something, but at least there's something to talk about, and that can be sometimes a pathway to other things. And I think if a person is shy or has social anxiety, even that might be scary to think about doing. But if you just sort of put that in a picture with what are all the other scarier things that I could do, maybe this is one little first step I could take. And then as far as friends go, with connections and things are happening, I really feel, and I know this would probably be hard for a lot of young people, but it might be something to work toward, is finding a way to express that you're sad or disappointed about something with less emotion. And so that if you do the breathing that you recommended, or the pause or the beat, so that you're feeling pretty solid and still on the inside, and that you know what you want to say, and it's really simple and straightforward. Wow, just take a breath and say it, and then just see what happens. And it's really fascinating how often it turns out that, oh my gosh, I had no idea you'd be interested in that, or I thought you'd be busy or something. There's often a benign explanation for these things. And if with more time, I would say more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I remember feeling like if I wasn't, I don't know, invited to go out to the movies, or like my friends walked to class without me, I remember feeling really upset. But, sometimes it was just like, oh, we didn't know you were still in the dorm, or there was another reason. So I think taking that step back and not approaching the conversation when you're feeling more calm, and in psychology we say not being as reactive, like you're going to have a conversation and kind of explode, which I know is really hard, because sometimes when you're emotional, you're just like, I want to let it all out. But I think in order to have these difficult conversations, taking a step back, thinking, deciding how you want to respond so you can have a productive conversation and not get into a fight can be really important. And then using the I statements, and it's not, you did this, you walked to class without me, and that was wrong, because that can kind of put people on the defense and they can get upset. But it was just more like, well, I felt left out when this happened. Could you not do that again? And starting a conversation from that point, I think, can be really helpful, because, again, as Claire was saying, like sometimes people just didn't realize, what was happening and how it affected you. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in our own world, and we don't always think about how what we're doing might influence our friends. So to just have those kind of open and honest conversations, I think, is a really good place to start. Oh my gosh, so we learned so much today. We were talking about parents and kind of navigating those relationships, and how you can use the breathe, notice, respond, or stop, notice, respond technique, talking about significant others and really kind of managing expectations around the relationship, as well as setting boundaries and maintaining your sense of self. And then peers, and navigating relationships with peers, again, using some of those techniques that we talked about before for breathing, but also having those kind of open communication channels and using those I feel statements, and just helping people to open those conversations, and talk about tricky things that might be bothering you. So there's so much more that we could probably talk about on this topic. It's a huge topic. So I just want to, I guess, before we end, give Dr. Wheeler a chance to say some closing words in case there's anything else she wants to say. And I'll remind you all too that these topics you can vote for in our app in the community section. So if you click the community button, there's a poll. Every month we come on, we do these Ask the Expert talks, and you can vote for, what you want to learn about, what you want us to talk about. So today was navigating relationship stress. So thanks, Dr. Wheeler, for being here. I'll pop it over to you for any closing thoughts.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been a joy as always. And of course, the time flew by, as it always does. I think the last thing I'd like to just add is that the most important friendship that you will ever have is with yourself. And being a good friend to yourself is just as important, if not more, than being a good friend to everyone else. So that's a good starting point as well. And thank you so much, and hope you all have a great day and a great week. Bye.